So there I am, phone pressed to my ear, literally briefing state prosecutors about government corruption, when some HOA Karen and her teenage son march up my driveway and demand I hand over my Harley keys. Right now, for the good of the community. The smell of motor oil and fresh coffee hung in my garage, while morning dew sparkled on $25,000 worth of restored heritage softail. I'm mid-sentence with the state attorney's office, explaining municipal bid rigging, when this kid who's failed his driver's test twice points at my bike and says, "My mom thinks you should let me borrow this for prom." His mother nods like this makes perfect sense. "It's community service, Mr. Bellwether. Sharing is caring." I'm thinking this has got to be a joke, but then she actually calls 911, on me, while I'm talking to prosecutors about corruption. What would you do if some entitled HOA president interrupted your call with law enforcement to steal your motorcycle? Drop a comment with where you're watching from and whether your neighborhood has ever produced this level of crazy. Let me back up and explain how I ended up in this nightmare. My name's Marcus Bellwether, but everyone calls me Tank. 20 years in the Marines, mostly as a diesel mechanic, fixing everything from Humvees to generators in places where warranty void meant absolutely nothing. After my divorce finalized, I used the settlement to buy a modest ranch house in Willowbrook Estates. Seemed like a quiet place to rebuild my life. The Harley? That's my dad's bike. Vietnam vet, Purple Heart recipient, died of cancer 3 years back, left me this 1998 Heritage Softail and about 15 boxes of original parts. Spent every weekend for 3 years bringing her back to life. New paint, rebuilt engine, custom leather seat that fits my hands like a prayer. When I fire her up, that deep rumble of a properly tuned V-twin sounds like freedom itself. Willowbrook Estates looked perfect on paper. Middle-class subdivision built around an artificial lake, walking trails, speed bumps every 200 yards to keep the kids safe. Manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, that peaceful suburban vibe you see in commercials. What they don't advertise is the HOA 7 board members charging $180 monthly to tell you what color you can paint your shutters. Enter Constance Thornfield. Connie to her friends, though I suspect that list is shorter than she thinks. Real estate agent, divorced mom, HOA president for 4 straight years running unopposed because nobody else wanted the headache. Bleached blonde bob, oversized sunglasses permanently perched on her head, drives a white BMW X5 with real TR1 vanity plates. She's got that passive-aggressive communication style perfected. Every email sounds helpful while somehow making you feel like garbage. Connie believes rules apply differently to quality residents, her words, not mine. She controls the architectural review committee with an iron fist and maintains a suspiciously cozy relationship with Jim Kratzky, our local code enforcement officer. More on him later. My first taste of Connie's justice came 3 weeks after moving in. Certified letter claiming my motorcycle violated commercial vehicle restrictions under bylaw 7.3b. Apparently, my Harley was somehow equivalent to running a business out of my garage. This while my neighbor's plumbing van sat in his driveway 24/7, and the landscaper across the street parked his trailer loaded with mowers right on the street. Oh, and Connie's BMW? Covered in magnetic real estate signs every weekend. I sent a polite email with photographic evidence of actual commercial vehicles, requesting equal enforcement. You know what happened next? Emergency board meeting, second violation notice, $150 fine. The diesel fumes from my neighbor's work truck were thick in the air while I photographed his non-commercial Ford F-350 with Martinez plumbing painted on both sides. The irony was almost funny. Almost. Then there's Bradley Connie's 16-year-old son, and the future of America, apparently. This kid failed his driver's test twice, crashed his mom's car into a mailbox, and put his dad's pickup through a fence. But somehow he's convinced he's ready for a motorcycle. Bradley's been fixated on my Harley since day one, making comments about old guys hogging all the cool rides. First time he approached me directly, I was washing the bike in my driveway. Kid strolls over, hands in his pockets, and suggests I should let him borrow it for prom night. When I politely explained insurance liability and offered to show him the engineering instead, he got that look kids get when the world doesn't revolve around them. Sulked away muttering about selfish veterans and how his mom was right about problem neighbors. That conversation happened on a Saturday. By Tuesday, I had 4 separate violation notices in my mailbox. The pattern was becoming clear, but I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole actually went. or that my phone calls with the state attorney's office were about to become very, very relevant to my own situation. 2 weeks after that first violation notice, Connie launched what I can only describe as a selective enforcement campaign that would make a Soviet bureaucrat proud. She mobilized her network of concerned neighbors, and by concerned, I mean bored housewives with nothing better to do than document my every move. Suddenly, I was receiving violation notices faster than junk mail. Grass allegedly a quarter inch too long, despite measuring exactly 2 3/4 inches well within the 3-inch limit. Garbage cans visible from the street for 3 hours after pickup, even though collection doesn't happen until noon and everyone else's cans sit out until evening. Excessive outdoor maintenance sounds for changing my motorcycle's oil on a Saturday afternoon. Each violation came with a $150 fine and enough legal jargon to choke a paralegal. My mailbox started looking like a crime scene stuffed with certified letters, while my neighbor's identical violations went completely unnoticed. The acrid smell of diesel exhaust from Martinez's plumbing truck mixed with the sweet scent of Mrs. Patterson's overgrown honeysuckle as I photographed the hypocrisy. Her grass was actually taller than mine, and the guy 2 doors down had been pressure washing his driveway every weekend for a month. That's when I met Elena Rodriguez, my next-door neighbor and the first person to show me I wasn't going crazy. Elena's a single mom, works nights as a nurse, raising twin 7-year-olds who somehow managed to be angels compared to Bradley Thornfield. She knocked on my door one evening after I'd jump-started her car during that ice storm in March. "I've been watching what Connie's doing to you," she said, handing me a homemade tamale that smelled like heaven. "It's the same pattern she used on the Hendersons before they moved, and the Washingtons, and that elderly couple who used to live where the Kramers are now." Elena had noticed something I'd missed, Connie's selective blindness to her own son's behavior. Bradley threw parties every weekend that rattled windows 3 houses away, left beer cans scattered across the community walking trail, and had already put a basketball-sized dent in Mr. Aiden's garage door with his mom's BMW. 0 violations, 0 fines, 0 consequences. I decided to fight back with documentation. Started spending my evenings researching public HOA meeting minutes, financial records, architectural review decisions. The clicking of my keyboard became a nightly soundtrack, accompanied by the gentle bubbling of my coffee percolator working overtime. Back in the Marines, we had a saying, "Proper preparation prevents piss-poor performance." Time to put that wisdom to work. What I found made my blood boil. Pattern after pattern of Connie approving her friends' requests while denying identical proposals from everyone else. Swimming pool permits, approved instantly for board members, delayed 6 months for regular homeowners. Fence modifications, Connie's poker buddies got rubber stamps, while working families got rejected for aesthetic concerns. During my research, I remembered something from my deployment days. A JAG officer once told us that targeting someone based on military service could violate federal discrimination laws. I contacted Sarah Aiden, a housing discrimination attorney who specialized in HOA abuse cases. Turns out my Marine buddy was right. The systematic harassment of a veteran can trigger Fair Housing Act investigations, and those carry serious federal penalties. But here's where things got really interesting. While cross-referencing recent home sales with HOA violation records, I discovered something that made my mechanic's brain start connecting dots. 3 properties had sold through Connie's real estate agency in the past year. All 3 sellers had received sudden floods of HOA violations just months before listing. All 3 sold below market value for quick sales. All 3 transactions generated healthy commissions for Connie's agency. It was like diagnosing a bad engine. Once you spot the pattern, the whole system's corruption becomes obvious. This wasn't random HOA politics. This was a deliberate real estate manipulation scheme. Meanwhile, Bradley escalated his motorcycle obsession. This time he approached me with 3 friends in tow, clearly trying to use peer pressure. Claimed other cool neighbors let kids borrow their vehicles all the time. When I explained insurance laws and liability issues again, he threw a full teenage tantrum right there in my driveway. "You're hoarding something that should benefit the whole community," he shouted, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "My mom says people like you are what's wrong with America." My hands tightened around the wrench I was holding, grease from the bike's chain making my grip slippery. The kid was parroting his mother's rhetoric word for word, and I realized this harassment wasn't random teenage entitlement. It was coordinated strategy. As Bradley stormed off with his little posse, I made a decision. Time to stop playing defense and start gathering evidence. Real evidence. The kind that holds up in court and ruins corrupt officials' careers. Because if there's one thing 20 years in the Marines taught me, it's that bullies only understand one language: overwhelming force applied at exactly the right moment. 3 days after Bradley's public tantrum, things escalated to a whole new level of corrupt. I'm in my garage changing the oil on my truck when this guy pulls up in a city vehicle. Jim Kratzky, our local code enforcement officer. Clipboard in hand, cheap cologne thick enough to cut with a knife, acting like he owns the place. Got an anonymous complaint about a home-based business, he announces, not bothering with pleasantries. Need to inspect your property for violations. Anonymous complaint, my ass. The timing was about as subtle as a brick through a window. Kratzky starts poking around my garage like he's hunting for buried treasure, looking for any technical violation he can write up. The smell of motor oil and his bargain basement aftershave created this nauseating cocktail that made me want to open every door and window. Here's where my research habit paid off. The night before, I'd been digging through public marriage records. Don't ask me why, just following instincts, and discovered Jim Kratzky's brother married Connie's sister back in 2018. Small world, right? So much for impartial code enforcement. Kratzky finally settles on oil stains in my driveway. Environmental hazard, he declares with the authority of someone who probably couldn't change his own oil. Contaminating groundwater, violating Municipal Code 15.7c. I wanted to laugh. These were the same oil stains every mechanic in America has dealt with since Henry Ford started mass-producing cars. But I bit my tongue and documented everything. Back in Iraq, we learned that corrupt officials always overplay their hand eventually. You just had to be patient enough to catch them. Meanwhile, I kept digging deeper into the neighborhood's recent history. Elena introduced me to Dorothy Walsh Dot to her friends, a retired paralegal who'd moved to Willowbrook 3 years ago. Sharp as a tack at 67, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Dot had been quietly watching Connie's operation with professional interest. 23 years working family court, she told me over coffee in her kitchen, surrounded by legal books and file folders. I recognize a pattern when I see one. Your Karen isn't just power hungry, she's running a profitable scam. Dot walked me through the mechanics of HOA liens, something I'd never thought about before. Turns out, unpaid HOA fines become liens against your property, just like unpaid taxes. And just like tax liens, they can force foreclosure proceedings if they accumulate enough. The beauty of it from a scammer's perspective is that most homeowners don't realize how serious those little violation notices can become until it's too late. We spent the afternoon cross-referencing property records with HOA financial statements. The pattern was crystal clear. Targeted harassment created unpaid fines. Unpaid fines became liens. Liens forced distressed sales. Distressed sales generated real estate commissions. Connie had turned her HOA presidency into a property flipping machine. But here's the mini twist that changed everything. Dot discovered that Connie's real estate company had been purchasing HOA liens from the association at 50 cents on the dollar, then using those same liens to force foreclosures. She was literally buying the ammunition to destroy her neighbors' lives, then profiting when they lost their homes. 8 properties in 3 years, Dot said, sliding a manila folder across her kitchen table. All following the identical pattern. All sold through her agency after foreclosure. The mechanical precision of it reminded me of diagnosing engine problems. Once you understand the system, the failure points become obvious. Connie had weaponized bureaucracy itself. That evening, I'm installing a security camera system in my garage, Amazon's finest motion-activated surveillance equipment, when I hear someone fumbling around outside. 2 in the morning, and there's Bradley Thornfield trying to start my Harley with what looked like a wire coat hanger. The kid had actually knocked the bike over trying to figure out how to bypass the ignition. The sound of my Heritage Softails kickstand scraping against concrete was like nails on a chalkboard. This machine was my father's legacy, and watching some spoiled teenager treat it like a toy made my blood boil. I found him still struggling with the unfamiliar weight when my motion lights kicked on. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Bradley stammered something about protecting the bike from potential thieves, like he was doing me a favor by breaking into my garage at 2 a.m. The damage wasn't catastrophic, some scratches on the original paint, maybe $400 in cosmetic repairs, but the violation felt personal. I could have called the police right then, should have, probably. But something told me this was just the opening move in a much bigger game. So I documented everything, took photos, got everything on video, and sent Bradley home with a warning. Because sometimes the best weapon isn't the one you fire immediately, it's the one you keep in reserve until exactly the right moment. By now, Connie realized I wasn't going to roll over and play dead like her previous victims. Time for the nuclear option, a full-scale social pressure campaign designed to turn the entire neighborhood against me. She started spreading whispers about the unstable veteran with anger issues living next to the community lake. The rumor mill worked overtime. Suddenly, I was supposedly suffering from PTSD, prone to violent outbursts, a danger to children and property values. Connie discouraged neighbors from associating with me, citing safety concerns for their families. She'd corner people at the mailboxes, voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm just worried about everyone's well-being, you understand." The smell of fresh mulch from the community landscaping crew mixed with the sound of hedge trimmers as I watched Connie work her magic at the monthly HOA meeting. She'd scheduled an emergency vote on enhanced vehicle restrictions that would effectively ban motorcycles from the neighborhood. Claimed multiple residents had complained about noise pollution from my bike, despite the fact that I rarely started it before 10 a.m. and never after 8 p.m. Her theatrical performance was Oscar-worthy. Manicured nails tapping against the podium for emphasis, designer outfit chosen specifically for maximum camera appeal because yes, she was recording these meetings now for transparency. Every gesture calculated to portray her as the reasonable community leader protecting families from the dangerous outsider. The community split down predictable lines. Elena stood by me, along with Dot Walsh and 3 other neighbors who'd grown tired of HOA overreach, but plenty of residents were scared terrified of becoming Connie's next targets if they sided with the wrong person. I watched them during meetings, sitting in careful neutral zones, eyes down, desperate to avoid attention. Meanwhile, I'd been doing my homework on HOA law. 20 years of reading technical manuals taught me that every system has rules, and every rule can be used as a weapon if you understand it properly. Spent my evenings studying our neighborhood's governing documents, cross-referencing them with state homeowner association statutes. What I found was beautiful in its simplicity. Connie had been violating her own bylaws for years. The governing documents required a 2/3 majority for any new restrictions, but she'd been ramming through decisions with simple majorities. Several recent HOA rulings were legally invalid due to improper voting procedures. From my deployment experience with rules of engagement, I knew that procedural violations could invalidate entire operations. The same principle applied here. If Connie couldn't follow her own association's bylaws, her decisions carried no legal weight. But I kept this knowledge to myself, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy it. That moment almost came during Bradley's most brazen act yet. I'd driven to visit my elderly aunt in the next county, planning a quiet weekend away from the HOA drama. What I didn't expect was for Bradley to treat my absence as an invitation to break into my garage. The kid had apparently learned lockpicking from YouTube, God bless the internet age, and planned to borrow my Harley for a weekend joyride with his girlfriend. The cold metal picks felt foreign in his nervous, sweating hands as he worked on my garage door lock, probably imagining himself as some kind of teenage rebel. But my new security system had other plans. Silent alarm triggered the moment he started tampering with the lock, sending notifications to Elena and automatically contacting local police. Response time was 6 minutes flat, not bad for a suburban department on a Saturday night. They caught Bradley red-handed, surrounded by lockpick tools and security footage that would make prosecutors weep with joy. The kid's hands were literally shaking as officers cuffed him, while his borrowed lockpicks scattered across my garage floor like evidence of premeditation. Connie arrived at the scene in her BMW within minutes, probably monitoring police scanners at this point. She tried every trick in the book, claiming it was a misunderstanding, suggesting Bradley was checking on the property for security purposes, even hinting that maybe I'd left the garage unlocked and Bradley was just investigating suspicious activity. The police radio chatter mixed with Connie's increasingly frantic explanations created this surreal soundtrack to her empire crumbling in real time. But here's the thing about small-town cops. They might not be Harvard graduates, but they recognize bullshit when they see it. Clear video footage of breaking and entering doesn't leave much room for creative interpretation. When I returned Sunday evening, the police briefed me on everything. Crystal clear security footage showed Bradley's premeditated break-in attempt, complete with YouTube lockpicking tutorials queued up on his phone. I could have pressed felony charges right there, breaking and entering, attempted theft of a motor vehicle, possession of burglary tools. Instead, I made the strategic choice to wait. This incident was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and rushing to press charges might tip off Connie to the scope of evidence I was gathering. Sometimes patience is the deadliest weapon in your arsenal. 3 days after Bradley's arrest, Dot Walsh knocked on my door with a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse and a look in her eyes that meant business. 23 years as a paralegal had taught her how to dig through public records like an archaeologist hunting for buried treasure. "Tank, you need to see this," she said, spreading documents across my kitchen table. "It's worse than we thought." What she'd uncovered made my blood run cold. Using her contacts at the county clerk's office, Dot had cross-referenced property deeds, HOA financial records, and business license filings. The pattern that emerged was a masterclass in systematic theft disguised as community management. Here's how Connie's scam worked. Target a homeowner with excessive violations and fines. When those fines went unpaid and who has an extra few thousand lying around for bogus grass height violations, they automatically became liens against the property. Here's the part that made me want to punch a wall. Connie's shell company, Community Asset Recovery LLC, had been purchasing those liens from the HOA at 50 cents on the dollar. Think about that for a second. She created the violations, imposed the fines, then bought the resulting debt at a discount. It's like a loan shark lending you money, then buying your IOU from himself at half price and calling it a business transaction. Once she owned the liens, Connie could force foreclosure proceedings just like unpaid property taxes. Desperate homeowners facing legal costs they couldn't afford would sell quickly at below-market prices to avoid foreclosure. Guess whose real estate agency handled those distressed sales? And guess who often ended up buying the properties through various LLCs, then flipping them for 30 to 40% profit? 8 properties in 3 years, Dot explained, her finger tracing the paper trail, all following identical patterns, all generating massive commissions through her agency. The financial scope was staggering. 2.3 million in artificially generated real estate transactions. Connie had turned our neighborhood HOA into her personal money printing machine, and most residents never realized they were funding their own destruction. But here's what made this discovery absolutely perfect. Remember my consultation work with the state attorney's office on municipal vehicle contracts? Well, their public integrity unit had been investigating similar corruption patterns across 3 counties. I was literally working as a consultant on corruption cases while living next door to one of the most systematic HOA frauds they'd ever see. The timing couldn't have been better. My evidence was already being compiled for prosecutors who specialized in exactly this type of racketeering. And thanks to federal mail fraud laws, those certified violation notices Connie loved so much, this wasn't just local corruption. This was a federal case waiting to happen. Dot's research revealed the victim profile. Elderly residents on fixed incomes, single mothers, veterans, minorities, basically anyone less likely to hire attorneys and fight back. Classic predatory targeting. The psychological manipulation was almost as disgusting as the financial theft. "She's currently working on 4 more targets," Dot said, sliding another set of documents across the table. "Including you, obviously, but also Mrs. Peterson, the Martinez family, and that young couple who just had twins." The scope of Connie's operation explained everything. The selective enforcement, the weaponized code violations, even Bradley's obsession with my motorcycle. This wasn't personal vendetta, this was business. I was just another property to be harvested for real estate profit. But Connie had made one critical mistake. She'd targeted someone who spent his days consulting with prosecutors about corruption patterns. Someone who understood that documentation and patience could bring down entire criminal enterprises. The hunter had just become the hunted, and she had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting in my garage. Elena brought coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Dot arrived with 3 legal pads and enough pens to stock an office supply store, and I'd already contacted Sarah Aiden about expanding our legal strategy. The smell of motor oil and fresh coffee created the perfect atmosphere for plotting the downfall of a neighborhood tyrant. "We're not just fighting an HOA president anymore," I told the group, spreading Dot's evidence across my workbench. "We're taking down a criminal enterprise." Sarah Aiden joined us via speakerphone from her downtown office, her voice crackling through my garage's Bluetooth speaker. Based on the documentation you've provided, we're looking at potential RICO violations, mail fraud, wire fraud, and Fair Housing Act discrimination. This is federal prosecutor territory. The plan we developed was surgical in its precision. Multiple pressure points, coordinated timing, maximum legal impact. Elena would handle community organizing, quietly reaching out to Connie's other victims, building a coalition of affected homeowners. Dot would continue her paper trail archaeology, documenting every transaction and timeline. Sarah would prepare the comprehensive civil lawsuit while I coordinated with the state attorney's office. But we needed one more player: media coverage. Dot's neighbor works at KBTV, and she recommended Janet Kim, an investigative reporter who'd been tracking HOA abuse stories across the state. Janet specialized in exposing corrupt officials who preyed on vulnerable homeowners, exactly our situation. During our first phone conversation, Janet's enthusiasm was infectious. "I've been waiting for a case like this," she said. "Clear paper trail, systematic fraud, sympathetic victims. This could be the story that changes HOA law statewide." While building our team, I learned something that changed my whole perspective on public records requests. Back in Afghanistan, we'd use intelligence gathering to identify supply chain corruption, following the money trail to find who was skimming diesel fuel or medical supplies. The same principles applied here. Every transaction leaves a paper trail, and patience plus persistence can uncover any scam. I started filing Freedom of Information Act requests with the city, county, and state. HOA board meeting minutes, code enforcement complaint records, property transfer documents, even Jim Kratzky's employment records. The beauty of FOIA requests is that corrupt officials can't hide behind privacy laws. Government business is public business, and they hate being reminded of that fact. My Marine buddy Rico Santos drove down from Dallas with surveillance equipment that would make the NSA jealous. "Heard you were having neighborhood problems," he said, unloading cases of cameras and audio gear from his pickup truck. Rico runs a private security firm now, specializing in corporate fraud investigations. We spent the weekend installing long-range audio equipment strategically positioned near Connie's favorite restaurant, Chez Laurent, where she held her weekly business lunches with Jim Kratzky and City Council member Rick Pemberton. All surveillance conducted from public property using commercially available technology, completely legal under federal wiretapping laws. The technical education I got from Rico was invaluable. Modern surveillance equipment doesn't require breaking into buildings or planting bugs. Digital zoom cameras with telephoto lenses can capture license plates from half a mile away. Parabolic microphones can pick up conversations through restaurant windows from across the street. Everything we needed was available on Amazon with overnight shipping. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Bradley's girlfriend, Madison Creek. Turns out this kid had been bragging to her about his mother's business genius, explaining the entire property acquisition scheme like he was proud of it. Madison, who apparently has more moral compass than her boyfriend, had been secretly recording these conversations. Elena arranged the meeting through her twins, who knew Madison from school. The girl showed up at my garage looking terrified but determined, clutching her phone like it contained nuclear launch codes, which in a sense it did. "Bradley told me everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How his mom targets people, forces them out, then buys their houses cheap. He thinks it's cool, like she's some kind of business mastermind. But it's wrong, isn't it?" The recordings were devastating. Bradley's voice, clear as day, explaining how his mother identified problem neighbors, manufactured violations, and coordinated with code enforcement to pressure them into selling. He even bragged about the break-in attempt, calling it reconnaissance for future harassment campaigns. Sarah Aiden's voice over the phone was practically purring when I played the recordings. "This is conspiracy to commit fraud with intent to deprive homeowners of their property rights. Federal prosecutors love cases with this level of documented criminal intent." Everything was falling into place. Community support, legal strategy, media coverage, surveillance evidence, and now direct admissions from the conspirators themselves. All we needed was the perfect moment to spring our trap. Connie had no idea that her reign of terror was about to become a case study in how to destroy corrupt officials using their own weapons against them. By this point, Connie must have sensed something was wrong. I'd stopped paying her bogus fines, stopped responding to her violation notices, and worst of all, I kept showing up to HOA meetings with a notebook and that confident smile that says, "I know something you don't." Desperate people do desperate things, and Connie Thornfield was about to prove that rule in spectacular fashion. The sabotage attempt happened on a Tuesday night. I was in the house watching the evening news when Rico's surveillance system started pinging alerts on my phone. Motion detected in the garage, infrared signatures moving around my motorcycle. I pulled up the live camera feed and watched Bradley Thornfield crouched next to my Harley with a wrench set, systematically loosening the brake cable connections. Not just loosening, carefully adjusting them to fail gradually. The kid had actually researched this, probably on the same YouTube channels that taught him lockpicking. He wasn't trying to kill me, just cause a minor accident that would teach me a lesson about community cooperation. The metallic scraping of the cable housing against the frame made my skin crawl as I watched him work. I let him finish. Sometimes the best evidence comes from letting criminals complete their crimes on camera. By the time Bradley slipped out of my garage, I had 47 minutes of high-definition footage showing premeditated sabotage of a motor vehicle, a Class C felony in Texas. The next morning, during my routine maintenance check, I discovered the tampering immediately. 20 years of working on military vehicles teaches you to spot mechanical sabotage from a mile away. I photographed everything before making repairs, then called Detective Morrison at the Sheriff's Department. The fingerprint recovery team found Bradley's clear impressions all over the brake assembly. This wasn't teenage mischief anymore. Combined with the break-in attempt, we were looking at escalating criminal behavior that could have resulted in serious injury or death. More importantly, it established a clear pattern of conspiracy between Connie and her son to commit felony crimes against a targeted neighbor. Connie's reaction to the police investigation was pure panic wrapped in righteous indignation. She marched over to Elena's house that same afternoon, all fake smiles and thinly veiled threats. Elena recorded the entire conversation on her phone, capturing Connie's suggestion that single mothers need community support that could disappear if they associate with troublemakers. The witness intimidation charge practically wrote itself. Elena's hands were shaking when she played me the recording later that evening, but her voice was steady. "I've dealt with bullies before in the hospital. They always overplay their hand when they're scared." Meanwhile, Connie was manipulating the HOA board to threaten special assessments against uncooperative residents, essentially trying to tax us into submission. She'd discovered that HOA boards can impose emergency assessments for almost any reason, and she planned to hit Elena and me with $1,000 community improvement fees that just happened to target her biggest critics. But here's where her desperation led to a critical mistake. Connie contacted Tommy Williams, the editor of our local newspaper and her longtime poker buddy, requesting negative coverage of the unstable veteran disrupting neighborhood harmony. She wanted a front-page story about PTSD dangers and property value impacts. What she didn't know was that Tommy's nephew served in the same Marine unit as me, 2 deployments later. Small world. Instead of printing Connie's propaganda, Tommy called me directly to verify the story. That conversation led to him investigating Connie's operation independently, turning her media manipulation attempt into another avenue of evidence gathering. The bribery attempt came the following Friday. Connie showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and her most sincere smile, suggesting we work out our differences like civilized neighbors. She offered to drop all HOA fines and restrictions in exchange for my cooperation and understanding. The sweetener was beautiful in its corruption. Suggested I could receive contractor preference for all HOA maintenance work, potentially thousands in monthly income if I just stopped causing problems. Classic quid pro quo bribery, and she laid it out like she was doing me a favor. My palms were sweating as I gripped the hidden recording device in my pocket, but I kept my voice steady and interested. "That sounds reasonable, Connie. Tell me more about how this contractor arrangement would work." 37 minutes of her explaining the mechanics of corruption, all captured in crystal clear audio. The final piece of evidence came from Bradley himself. Facing felony charges and serious juvenile consequences, his attorney suggested cooperation in exchange for reduced sentencing. The kid cracked like an egg, revealing not just his own crimes but his mother's detailed instructions for the entire harassment campaign. Turns out Connie had a literal playbook, a written document outlining her property acquisition strategy, complete with timelines, target profiles, and coordination protocols with Jim Kratzky. Bradley had been recording some of these phone instructions for reference, creating an evidence goldmine that prosecutors dream about. The trap was set. All the pieces were in position. Now we just needed the perfect moment to spring it. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Connie Thornfield was about to prove that principle in the most spectacular way possible. She launched her nuclear option, a full-scale character assassination campaign designed to destroy my reputation before I could destroy hers. The false allegations started subtly, whispered conversations at the mailboxes about my erratic behavior and concerning late-night activities, then escalated to direct claims that I'd threatened her and Bradley, suggesting my military service had left me mentally unstable and potentially violent. She painted herself as a terrified single mother protecting her son from a dangerous veteran who couldn't handle civilian life. The coup de grace was her media manipulation attempt. Connie contacted Rick Martinez at the Tribune-Herald, a sympathetic columnist who specialized in human interest stories about community safety. She fed him a carefully crafted narrative about PTSD dangers and property values, complete with fabricated quotes about my threatening behavior toward neighborhood children. What she didn't count on was Rick doing actual journalism. He called the sheriff's department to verify her claims, contacted Elena and Dot for corroborating statements, and even reached out to my former Marine unit commander. When the facts didn't match Connie's story, Rick smelled a bigger scandal and started investigating her instead. Connie's trembling hands were visible during the next HOA meeting as she realized her media strategy had backfired. The woman who'd controlled every narrative for 4 years was losing her grip on the story, and everyone could see it. Her final legal gambit was a restraining order claiming I'd stalked and threatened her. The sworn affidavit was a masterpiece of creative fiction. Alleged incidents of me following her car, making threatening gestures while she walked her dog, and verbally intimidating her during chance encounters at the grocery store. One tiny problem. Rico's surveillance system had been tracking my movements for weeks as part of our evidence gathering. Every single incident Connie described had me documented elsewhere, working in my garage, meeting with Sarah Aiden at her office, or visiting my aunt in the next county. Her sworn statements weren't just lies, they were provable perjury caught on camera. The restraining order hearing was a thing of beauty. Sarah Aiden walked into that courtroom with a tablet full of time-stamped video evidence and GPS records showing I was literally hundreds of miles away during Connie's alleged stalking incidents. The judge's expression shifted from skeptical to outright hostile as the evidence mounted. "Mrs. Thornfield," Judge Henderson said, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years on the bench, "perjury in sworn affidavits is a felony. I'm dismissing this restraining order and referring your statements to the district attorney for investigation." But the real breakthrough came from Rico's parabolic surveillance of Connie's weekly lunch meetings. We finally captured the smoking gun, clear audio of her planning my harassment with City Council member Rick Pemberton and Jim Kratzky. "The tank problem needs to be resolved before he causes real damage," Connie's voice carried clearly through the restaurant window. "Jim, can you find building code violations? Rick, what about zoning issues? We need him gone before he figures out the full scope of our operation." Pemberton's response was equally damning. "Property acquisition is a legitimate business strategy, but we can't let one troublemaker expose the entire system. Maybe it's time for more serious pressure." The federal implications were immediate. RICO cases require proof of ongoing criminal conspiracy, and we just captured explicit planning of that conspiracy on audio recording. When I played the clip for my state attorney contact, his response was immediate. "We need to move on this now." Meanwhile, Janet Kim's investigation was reaching its climax. Her undercover camera work had captured Connie attempting to bribe Jim Kratzky with tickets to Cowboys playoff games in exchange for accelerating code enforcement against me and Elena. The footage was damning enough to make prosecutors weep with joy. The community pressure was building too. 23 homeowners signed a petition supporting me and detailing their own harassment experiences. 3 families came forward with documentation showing they'd lost their homes through Connie's identical harassment patterns. The neighborhood was finally waking up to what had been happening in their midst. Bradley's complete cooperation provided the final evidence we needed. His juvenile plea agreement required full disclosure of his mother's instructions, and the kid provided everything. Recorded phone conversations, text message threads, even handwritten notes detailing surveillance assignments Connie had given him. The mother-son betrayal was devastating to watch. Bradley's attorney had explained that cooperation was his only chance to avoid adult felony charges, and the kid chose self-preservation over family loyalty. Can't say I blamed him. Connie had turned her own son into a criminal accomplice. Everything was converging toward a single moment. Sarah Aden had filed the comprehensive civil lawsuit. Federal prosecutors were preparing RICO charges. Janet Kim's expose was scheduled to air during the evening news cycle, and the HOA had called an emergency meeting to address the community crisis. The stage was set for Connie's final performance, though she had no idea she'd be playing to a very different audience than expected. The Willowbrook Community Center had never seen anything like it. What started as a routine emergency HOA meeting turned